Hey everybody, it's Caleb, and I'm going to teach you how to create a lightning sunset painting. So, this is what it looks like. And first we're going to start off with some orange acrylic paint. We're going to paint the entire canvas orange, and you're going to need a little bit of water to help that paint spread across the canvas. So if it doesn't spread well enough, then you know you'll need a little bit more water, and if it is dripping, then you know you have too much water. You can always get those drips off with a paper towel. Once it's smooth, you can go ahead and blow dry it or just let it dry. And then with some chalk, you're going to mark 1/4 of the way up the canvas from the bottom. Mark it on the right side and on the left side. And then you're going to make a mark halfway between the bottom of the canvas and that mark. That's going to help us know where the ground is and where the mountains should start. For the mountains, I don't want to create perfect triangles or have them evenly spread apart or have them all look the same. I want to create uneven shapes, have it be very random. Some little peaks might be attached to a larger peak. Now I'm going to draw it in quickly. It does not have to be perfect. I'm going to have a peak that is taller than all the rest. And then with some yellow paint, I'm going to create thin wispy clouds. I'm going to create little strokes. For some I'll use more paint, and for some I'll use very little paint. That way they all look very different. Some will be thick, some will be thin. You just want it all to be very random and natural looking. You don't want any clouds looking the same as another or evenly spread apart. I'm going to get this beautiful purple color and I'm going to apply it to the top area. I'm going to make sure to not go farther down than about 1/3 of the way. And I'm going to use little circular strokes and blobs so that I can get this cloudy texture. It all should look very random. You should have highs and lows so that it doesn't look just like a big rounded chunk, and you also want to avoid straight lines so that it looks fluffy. Now I'm going to fill in the mountains with the same color in a small brush, and I notice that these two peaks are at the same exact height, so I want to make them different from each other, so I'm going to make this right one a little bit higher. Now I'm going to fill in the mountains with crisscross shapes and just messy scribbles because I want to give it texture. And the key to this next step is going to be that I need to fill in the mountains quickly so that the paint will remain wet when I do this next step. I'm going to clean off my brush and make sure it's wet. And now I'm going to remove the purple paint from the left sides of these peaks. And that's going to create this beautiful highlight on the mountains. This gives it more depth and dimension. But I want to make sure that no peak looks the same as another. Now I'm going to add this bright light blue, but it's going to be a little bit watered down so it's not too thick. I want to still be able to see some of that purple showing through. I'm going to use scribbles and crisscross shapes and circular shapes so that it looks like fluffy clouds. Now I'm going to use a bright primary red and create that same texture down below the purple. I have that section on the left coming down because I would like for that red section to be kind of the glow of one of my lightning bolts. I'm going to tie in the red up here on top of some of the blue. I'm going to get a bright hot pink color and start to create some fluffy pink clouds on top. I don't want to cover everything up underneath. I just want to put these fluffy pink clouds in some areas. Now remember, if you make any sort of mistake, like applying the paint way too thick, like this, you can always brush it out. You can always blend it while it's still wet. There's no mistake that can't be fixed or adjusted, or sometimes you just roll with it and call it a happy accident. Now I'm bringing the pink down here in this funnel shape where the top is wider and the bottom is thinner. This is going to be the glow around the lightning. Once that's done, I'm going to add a few bright highlights of pink by mixing a little bit of white into that pink color that I originally had. Now I'm going to fill in the bottom section with black, very messy and scribbly so that it looks like rough terrain. Now for the pine trees, I like to do a vertical line, leave some space at the top, and then I start to create the branches. So that's very important to get that point at the very top. Now with the branches, I'm going to go back and forth from the top to bottom, and I want to make the tree just slightly wider as I go down. It needs to be a cone shape, otherwise your tree might not look like a tree. Notice these trees, how they're wider at the base and thinner at the top. What we want to avoid is strokes like this, where it looks very unnatural and overly separated. We want to avoid filling them in too much, and we also want to avoid making them unrealistic and cartoony by creating uniform arrow shapes. Now with some black paint, I'm going to make sure the brush is very flat. I'm going to create my thin line. I'm going to use very little pressure on the canvas so that the lines and strokes and branches that I make are very thin and controlled and don't become big blobs. I'm going to create little tiny trees by just using little lines and sometimes some squiggles. I want to make sure that I have tall trees, small trees, trees of all shapes and sizes. I want to make sure that each tree is a different size to help it look more natural. Now let's talk about lightning. Lightning does not always look like a perfect squiggle like you see in cartoons. It's very wobbly and it changes directions a lot and sometimes can branch out like a tree. Think of a haunted forest with really jagged tree branches. So that's what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to use the chalk to create my outline first. Once I'm happy with it, then I can fill it in with some paint. I'm going to create some branches and a few different sections of lightning. Once I'm done with that, I can take some white paint and fill in where I want the strokes to be thicker. And where I want the lines to be thinner, I'm going to use a white paint pen. And that way I will be able to paint those skinny little lightning bolts that branch off of the main lightning bolt. I don't want the tops of these two lightning bolts to look too similar to each other, so I'm going to change this one up and make it a little different than the other. This helps it look more natural. Now I sign my name, and that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody.